It began as a simple hiking trip. Three friends, Mason, Ellie, and Jordan, were exploring the dense forests outside Black Hollow, a forgotten Virginia town surrounded by old logging trails and silence. They weren't looking for trouble, just some fresh air, maybe a campsite. But a wrong turn-off, a rarely used path changed everything. As the trees thickened and sunlight dimmed, they stumbled upon something none of them could explain, a stone building, weathered by age and half-eaten by moss. Its spire, crooked and rusted, still reached toward the sky. Ivy strangled the cracked bell tower. The place looked ancient and forgotten, but not destroyed. It was a church. The strange thing? There were no roads, no markers, not even a clearing to suggest it had ever been part of a community. No signs of modern life. No footprints. No reason it should be there at all. They stood in stunned silence. Mason pulled out his phone to take a photo, but it wouldn't turn on. Ellie tried hers. Dead too. Jordan's compass spun uselessly in place. Still, curiosity pulled them forward. The heavy wooden doors creaked open with effort. The interior was cold, colder than it should have been. Broken pews lined the dusty floor. Stained glass windows, shattered long ago, let in fragmented beams of light. The altar was crumbling, overtaken by moss. The walls were scorched black in places, as if touched by fire, and then abandoned before it could finish its work. But it wasn't just what they saw. It was what they felt. The air had weight. It pressed on their chests like something was watching. Not a person, not an animal. Something else. Something that had waited too long and wasn't happy about being disturbed. Then Ellie noticed something strange behind the altar. The floorboards were uneven, rotten. She knelt down and pried them up with a broken plank. Beneath them, hidden under layers of dust and mold, was a square slab of metal, a trapdoor. The hinges were rusted shut, and a thick chain had been looped through the handle, sealed with a corroded padlock. Etched into the wood next to it were 5 words, barely visible under the grime. They took the children here. Jordan's breath caught. "This place is wrong," he whispered. But Mason, the most skeptical of the three, laughed nervously. "It's just some old church. Probably some creepy local legend. Let's get photos and go." None of their phones worked. No signal. No power. That's when Ellie noticed something even stranger. The moss on the inside walls was fresh. Green. Alive. As if the church hadn't been abandoned long ago, but recently disturbed. And in one of the pews, resting in the shadows, was a child's toy. A small wooden horse. Clean. Untouched by time. Someone had been here. Recently. Then the bell rang. Once. Loud. Clear. Echoing across the empty woods. But there were no ropes, no stairs to the tower. Nothing that could have made it move. The three friends looked at each other, wide-eyed. "Let's go," Ellie said, backing toward the door. But Mason was still staring at the trapdoor, eyes locked. "We should open it," he whispered. "We have to know what's down there." And as if in answer, the bell rang again. Twice. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a warning. Something below had heard them. And it was awake. In 1883, the town of Black Hollow was growing faster than it could handle. A booming lumber industry had attracted workers, laborers, and desperate families looking for a new life. But with prosperity came disaster. Sawmill accidents, disease, and fires left dozens of children without parents. And no one knew what to do with them. The town council met in private. The orphanage in nearby Richmond was overcrowded. Foster homes were limited, and most townsfolk couldn't afford to take in more mouths to feed. Something had to be done. Something cheap, discreet, out of sight. That's when Reverend Silas Wren offered a solution. A man of strong voice and stronger beliefs, Reverend Wren was known for his passionate sermons and firm discipline. He approached the town with an offer. He would build a church and orphan home just outside the town limits, deep in the woods. A place of God's mercy, he called it. A sanctuary where the lost lambs could be reformed, educated, and eventually adopted. The town agreed, relieved. The building went up quickly. Funds came in from donations and anonymous sponsors. The chapel was constructed of stone and wood, and behind it, a modest dormitory for the children. No road was built leading to it, just a narrow trail through the forest. Children were sent there in groups, mostly orphans from mill families. A few poor children surrendered by desperate parents. Once they entered the chapel's care, contact ceased. At first, no one noticed. Letters from the children stopped arriving. Reverend Wren claimed they were adjusting and needed time. He said they were being raised in strict Christian discipline and that worldly distractions were discouraged. But whispers started to spread. A boy named Elias was sent there in June. His older sister Mary, who worked as a laundress in town, never heard from him again. She went to the chapel once, hoping to visit. Reverend Wren met her at the path. He said Elias had been adopted by a wealthy family in the north. No, she couldn't see him. No, she couldn't write. Then it happened again, and again. Children disappeared into the forest and didn't come back. Some townspeople began to question Wren's practices, but he dismissed them, waving a heavy Bible and speaking of sin and salvation. He claimed critics were enemies of God, jealous of his good work. And the townspeople, busy, weary, and frightened of scandal, let it go. But some did not. A former teacher named Miss Abigail Royston began keeping records. She noted the names of every child sent to the chapel. She documented families who received no responses, and she asked quiet questions. The list grew. By 1885, she had written to state authorities in Richmond, begging them to investigate the missing children of Black Hollow. She never received a reply. Months later, she vanished. Her belongings left behind. Her cottage locked from the inside. The townspeople began to avoid the topic altogether. The trail leading to the chapel was left unmarked. Families with new orphans were encouraged to send them to Wren. No questions. No complaints. And Reverend Wren's power grew. He claimed he had saved over 60 children in just 2 years. But no one saw them. No one knew their names. His sermons became darker, filled with talk of sacrifice, redemption, and burning away impurity. Then one night, a scream echoed across the valley, heard from the edge of the woods. No one went to look. The next morning, Wren delivered his Sunday sermon as usual. But behind him on the chapel's back wall, townsfolk swore they saw something strange. A child's small handprint, burned into the wood. No one spoke of it again. The orphanage remained open until 1891. That was the year the fire came. But by then, no one could remember the names of the children inside. And no one, not even the bravest in town, dared to ask what had really happened behind the chapel's locked doors. The trapdoor behind the altar had been sealed for over a century. Mason, Ellie, and Jordan stood over it in silence, staring at the rusted iron loop and padlock that had somehow survived decades of rot and ruin. The words carved into the floorboards beside it, "They took the children here," were still faintly visible. Not scratched in anger, but carefully etched. As if whoever wrote them knew no one would believe them unless the truth was literally carved into wood. Despite the chill in the air, Mason's hands were slick with sweat as he pulled the lock loose. It snapped open with a sharp click, too easy, almost like it wanted to be opened. The trapdoor creaked as he lifted it. A blast of cold, damp air rolled up from the dark below. It smelled of mold, ash, and something else. Decay. They hesitated, but curiosity won. The narrow stairs descended into a space none of them expected. It wasn't just a basement. It was a network, stone walls, torch sconces long cold, a hallway that stretched deeper than the building itself. The walls were lined with cells, 6 on each side, each barely large enough to stand in. No doors, just thick iron bars that were rusted but still intact. Inside the first few were piles of rags, decayed wood beds and shattered bowls. One cell had a cracked slate tablet, its chalk markings faded. Another held the remains of a doll, missing its head. Ellie stopped walking. There were scratches on the walls, claw marks, countless tally marks carved into stone, names etched again and again. Some were children's names. Some were numbers. Some were prayers. "Deliver me, Father. I am not wicked." He said, "Fire saves us." Jordan shined his flashlight deeper into the corridor and gasped. The walls weren't just scratched. They were stained. faint but there. Brown-red blotches streaked the corners. Smudges shaped like hands. A trail that ran down the center of the stone hallway toward a large iron door. Suddenly, Ellie turned her head. "Did you hear that?" They froze. A soft voice echoed in the dark. "Please, I'm still here." It wasn't a sound the way normal sound travels. It came from behind the walls, from under the floor, from everywhere. They spun around. No one else was there. Jordan stepped back, heart racing. "That wasn't one of you?" Mason shook his head slowly. "We need to leave. Now." But the flashlight flickered. The door above creaked shut. A gust of wind slammed through the stairwell, and the trapdoor slammed closed. They were trapped. The air turned icy. The whisper came again, this time closer, childlike, shaky. "He locked us in. He said the fire would set us free." Jordan's light cut across the wall and revealed something none of them could explain. Footprints. Small, bare footprints, appearing in real time across the dust-covered floor. Moving toward them. They backed up quickly, breath shallow, minds racing. Then something brushed against Mason's leg. Cold, gentle, like a child reaching out. He swung around, but nothing was there. That's when Ellie screamed. Carved into the iron door at the end of the corridor were dozens of names, and hers was one of them. It wasn't possible. No one had written it. The metal was ancient. The whispers grew louder. More voices now. Some crying, some laughing, some begging to be let out, some inviting them to stay. "We never left. We live in the walls. Come pray with us." The cold was unbearable. The flashlight went out, and in the pitch black, surrounded by the spirits of forgotten children and the weight of sins buried by time, they finally understood the truth. This place was never abandoned. It had just been waiting. In the summer of 1891, a young girl named Eliza crawled out of the woods near Black Hollow, barefoot and bloodied, her eyes wild with terror. She was no older than 12, her dress torn, her body covered in bruises. A farmer found her collapsed near a creek, whispering a single word: fire. At first, they thought she was sick or delirious. But when they brought her into town, she began to speak. What she described would shatter the illusion Reverend Silas Wren had built for nearly a decade. She told them about the cells, about the punishments, about the prayers that were really screams. She spoke of nights without food, of children taken below, when they misbehaved, never to return. She said the Reverend didn't teach them scripture anymore. He taught them obedience. And if they disobeyed, he said the fire would cleanse them. The town was horrified. Finally, the silence was broken. Abigail Royston's disappearance made sense now. So did the rumors. So did the lack of letters, the vanishing children, the eerie quiet that had hung over the chapel for years. A group of townspeople, led by the mayor and several fathers of missing children, marched into the forest that very night. They carried lanterns, rifles, and the rage of a community that realized it had allowed a monster to hide behind stained glass and holy words. But what they found shook even the strongest among them. The church was ablaze. Orange flames reached toward the sky, devouring the steeple. Smoke poured from the bell tower. Through the heat and chaos, they saw him, Reverend Wren, standing calmly at the front doors, his arms raised, Bible in hand. He was preaching. His voice rang out through the crackle of fire and the screams coming from inside. They are being saved. Their sins will burn away. They will be pure before the Lord. Men rushed forward, trying to push past him, but the doors were barred from the inside. Wren wouldn't let them open it. He stood between them and the children inside, refusing to move. By the time they broke through the side wall, it was too late. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and ash. The cells below had collapsed, caved in by the weight of the fire. Some of the rescuers swore they saw small shapes in the flames, shadows of children clinging to the walls. Others claimed they heard whispers even as the last beams fell. When they dragged Reverend Wren out of the inferno, he was untouched by flame. Not a single burn, not a single scorch mark on his clothes. But his eyes were gone, not burned, not wounded, just gone. Two dark, empty sockets where his eyes used to be. He was taken to a small jail cell in town, locked away while the townspeople tried to understand what they had witnessed. In the days that followed, Wren refused food, water, and conversation. He sat in the corner of his cell, rocking slowly, murmuring the same lines over and over. The fire is the light. The fire is the way. They are clean now. They are with him. Then, one morning, he was dead. No one knew how. There were no wounds. No signs of struggle. He simply stopped breathing. The only odd thing the guards noticed? Ash on the floor beneath his cot. A perfect ring of it. After his death, the church ruins were buried. No one rebuilt it. The forest slowly grew over the foundation. The town made an unspoken agreement, never speak of it again. The names of the children were never carved into a monument. Their records were lost. The trail to the chapel faded, and the world moved on. But some say the bell still rings once a year, on the anniversary of the fire. Others say the path reappears when the forest wants to be found. And a few old families in Black Hollow, those whose ancestors marched into those woods in 1891, still tell their children, if you hear the bell, don't follow it. If you find the church, don't go inside. Because Reverend Wren is still preaching. When Mason, Ellie, and Jordan returned home after their horrifying encounter, they didn't speak of it right away. What could they say? Who would believe them? They had seen a church that didn't exist. They had heard whispers in the dark. And they had read a name, Ellie's full name, carved into ancient iron, predicting her arrival more than a century before she was born. For the first few days, they tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was an old hunting lodge. Maybe someone had restored it. Maybe it was a prank or a hallucination, or some strange collective delusion brought on by the isolation and cold. But the nightmares began immediately. Mason dreamt of burning children, tiny hands clawing at stone walls, mouths open in silent screams. Jordan saw the cells again in his mind every night, only this time the children looked up at him, whispering his name. And Ellie stopped speaking altogether. She wrote instead, pages and pages of things she didn't remember seeing. Blueprints of the chapel, lists of names, sermons, prayers, ritual symbols she had never studied, but somehow knew by heart. Then, one day, she disappeared. She had gone hiking alone. The note she left behind simply read, "It called me back." Her body was never found. Mason and Jordan went to the local authorities. They explained what they could, but no one took them seriously. A missing hiker in the mountains? Not unusual. An abandoned church? Maybe an old settler site. Nothing to investigate. So they returned. Just the two of them. They followed the same path through the woods, retraced their steps, climbed over fallen logs, and passed overgrown trails. And there it was, the church. Unburned, unbroken, exactly as it had been the first time. But this time, the front doors were already open. Inside, the pews had been cleaned. The altar restored. The trapdoor behind it? Missing. In its place was a polished wooden floor, gleaming with fresh varnish. And standing at the pulpit was Ellie, or something that looked like her. She was dressed in a black robe. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Her mouth moved silently, as if rehearsing words not meant for human ears. Mason called out her name. She didn't respond. Jordan moved toward her, but the moment his foot touched the center aisle, the bell rang overhead, 3 deafening chimes that shook the walls. And then the children appeared. They came from the shadows, from behind pews, from under floorboards that no longer existed. Dozens of them, pale, sunken faces, hollow eyes. Some looked like the children from the 1800s. Others looked newer, more recent. One of them was Elias. Another was Abigail Royston. And one, just one, had Mason's own face. That was the moment he ran. Jordan didn't make it. Mason never saw him again. He made it out of the woods at sunrise, covered in scratches, babbling about names and shadows. He was taken in by a local hiker who thought he had gotten lost and suffered from exposure. Mason tried to tell people what happened, but no one believed him. So he moved away, far away. But even across the country, he couldn't escape it. Every year, on the same night, He hears a bell toll 3 times outside his window. His lights flicker. His phone rings once. And when he checks the caller ID, the screen reads, Black Hollow Chapel. The police traced it once. The call came from a disconnected landline in Virginia. He doesn't answer anymore. And the chapel? It's no longer visible on satellite maps. But hikers still go missing in the Wasatch Forest near the old Black Hollow Trail. Locals whisper that sometimes, when the fog is thick and the air smells like smoke, you can see the outline of a steeple among the trees. Some say the chapel moves, that it only appears to those it calls. And those it calls never really leave. So if you ever find yourself hiking in that part of the country and you come across an old stone church where there shouldn't be one, don't go inside. If the bell rings, don't listen, because the fire is still burning, and Reverend Wren is still preaching.